November 24th, 1971. It was the day before Thanksgiving. Across America, airports were crowded with people heading home to spend the holiday with their families. But at Portland International Airport, one man was about to begin a journey that would become one of the strangest mysteries in American history. He walked up to the ticket counter and purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle. The name on the ticket was Dan Cooper. He looked completely ordinary. He appeared to be a man in his 40s, wearing a dark business suit, a white shirt, and a black tie. In his hand was a simple black briefcase. Nothing about him suggested that he was about to hijack a passenger airplane. He boarded Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 and took his seat. For the first part of the flight, everything seemed normal. The plane left Portland and headed towards Seattle. Passengers were relaxing. The air attendants were doing their usual work, and Cooper sat quietly in his seat. Then, he handed a folded note to an air attendant. At first, she didn't immediately read it. Cooper quietly asked her to look at the message. When she finally opened it, the situation changed completely. The note claimed that Cooper had a bomb. Then he opened his briefcase. Inside were wires and several red-colored objects that appeared to be explosives. Nobody has ever been able to prove with certainty whether the device was actually a bomb, but Cooper didn't take any chances. He calmly explained what he wanted. He demanded 4 parachutes, and he wanted $200,000 in $20 bills. The amount sounds unbelievable today, but in 1971 it was still a fortune. What made the situation even stranger was Cooper's behavior. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't acting violently. He wasn't panicking. He was calm, almost completely calm. It was as if he already knew exactly what he was going to do. The flight crew contacted authorities, and officials in Seattle began preparing for the aircraft's arrival. When Flight 305 landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, Cooper's first demand was fulfilled. The ransom money arrived, the parachutes arrived, and then the passengers were released. 36 passengers walked away from the aircraft. They were safe. But Cooper remained inside. He still had one final plan. The airplane would take off again. This time, there would be no passengers. Only Cooper and the crew would remain on board. The airplane was instructed to fly toward Mexico City, but Cooper wasn't planning to stay on the aircraft that long. Because somewhere in the darkness ahead, he was preparing to do something almost impossible. He was going to jump out of a moving passenger airplane and disappear.
Flight 305 took off again. It was now nighttime. Below the aircraft was the vast wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. Dark forests, mountains, rivers, and miles of land with very few people. Inside the airplane, Cooper remained calm. He had his money, he had his parachute, and he was waiting. Then, sometime after 8 p.m., the rear staircase of the Boeing 727 began to open. Cold air rushed into the cabin. The crew knew what Cooper was about to do. He was preparing to jump. Cooper moved toward the rear of the airplane, and then he disappeared into the darkness. He had jumped. One man, one parachute, a bag containing $200,000, and thousands of feet of darkness beneath him. The airplane continued flying. Eventually, it landed safely in Reno, Nevada. But Cooper wasn't there. He had vanished. Investigators immediately began searching for him, but there was a huge problem. Nobody knew exactly where he had landed. The wilderness below the flight path was enormous, and the jump had taken place at night. The FBI launched a massive investigation. Investigators examined the aircraft. They interviewed witnesses. They studied the parachutes. They searched the surrounding wilderness. And they began looking for anyone who might match Cooper's description. But there was another mystery. The man who had hijacked the plane had called himself Dan Cooper. The name D.B. Cooper became famous because of a media error, but that incorrect name eventually became one of the most recognizable names in American criminal history. For years, investigators searched for answers. Hundreds of suspects were considered, but no one could be conclusively identified as Cooper. Then, in 1980, almost 9 years after the hijacking, something extraordinary was discovered. A young boy named Brian Ingram was playing near the Columbia River in Washington. While digging in the sand, he discovered several bundles of old $20 bills. The total was about $5,800. Investigators checked the serial numbers, and then came the shocking discovery. The money was part of the ransom given to D.B. Cooper. But this discovery created an even bigger mystery. Cooper had received $200,000. Only $5,800 of it had been found. So where was the rest? How did those bills reach the Columbia River? Had Cooper buried the money? Had the river carried it there? Or had someone else moved it? Nobody knew. And if Cooper survived, where did he go? Over the years, several men were proposed as possible suspects. One of the most famous was Richard Floyd McCoy, who had also hijacked an airplane and escaped using a parachute. The similarities were interesting, but investigators ultimately rejected McCoy as D.B. Cooper. And so the mystery continued. No confirmed body, no confirmed identity, no confirmed escape. In 2016, after decades of investigation, the FBI announced that it was redirecting its resources away from the active case. But the Bureau left the door open for the investigation to be reconsidered if credible new physical evidence ever appeared. More than 50 years later, we still don't know what happened to D.B. Cooper. Maybe he died during the jump. Maybe he landed safely and disappeared into the wilderness. Or perhaps he survived. Maybe he changed his name. Maybe he built a completely ordinary life. Maybe he lived for decades while carrying a secret that nobody around him ever discovered. That's what makes this story so fascinating. Most mysteries eventually have an ending. A body is found. A suspect is arrested. Evidence reveals the truth. But D.B. Cooper left none of that behind. He left only a few clues: a parachute, a tie, some ransom money, and a question that has survived for more than half a century. Did D.B. Cooper really escape? We may never know, because on November 24, 1971, a man boarded a plane as Dan Cooper. He hijacked it. He demanded $200,000. He put on a parachute. He jumped into the darkness and disappeared, not just from the airplane, but from history itself.